You know why I love holidays, bro?
What?
Cause I like the food, bro.
Alright, so let's talk about it. What's the best?
Posada.
I didn't even let me finish, bro. I didn't even list
the
any.
best holiday foods, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's my family.
Announced the identity of the boy in the box. This is 4-year-old Joseph Augustus Zarelli, and he will no longer be known as America's unknown child. If you need the backstory on this case, just click on the last video that I made about it in the caption. Although Joseph was thankfully identified after 65 years, his murder is still currently unsolved. Captain Jason Smith of the Philadelphia Police Homicide Unit has made this statement, basically saying that they have their suspicions on who they think is responsible, but since it's an open investigation, they don't want to tarnish anything by talking about it. According to police, they have officially confirmed and identified Joseph's birth mom and dad, and even though both of them are now deceased, police are declining to identify them. Police also stated that Joseph does have siblings who are still alive. The last update was that Joseph had ties to a prominent family in Delaware County, Pennsylvania, and I guess for now that's all we'll know. But I'm glad that Joseph now has his name back, and the next step is finally getting his headstone changed.
The allegations of Ansel Elgort sexually assaulting a minor are pretty disturbing if they're true. Let's cover them. So if you don't know Ansel, he's an A-list Hollywood actor. He was in a number of movies like the Divergent series, The Fault in Our Stars, and a film that I love, Baby Driver. Now, I remember back when I was in high school, Ansel was a heartthrob and girls really loved him. But that would all change when some disturbing allegations came out in 2020. So on June 19th, 2020, a Twitter user named Gabby came forward with some pretty disturbing allegations about Ansel. Allegedly, according to Gabby, they had connected online, they had met up in person, Ansel had sexually assaulted her, and the entire time he knew that she was a minor, being 17 at the time that they had relations. Now, Gabby wrote a very long and thorough breakdown on exactly what happened. If you want to read it, it's still on Twitter. But it's really disturbing if all of this is true. Ansel was much older than Gabby. Obviously, this whole thing was illegal because she was a minor, and he even wanted to allegedly have relations with her also underage friend. In the wake of all of this, there were other people who came forward and claimed that Ansel had come onto them when they were minors as well. And as proof, the Twitter user named Gabby, who really fired off these first accusations, came forward and posted a screenshot showing Ansel giving her his private Snapchat information. I don't know what to think about all of this. Obviously, Ansel denied that any of this happened in the first place. He posted a pretty thorough response, but yeah, no legal ramifications ever came out of this whole ordeal. But Hollywood really hasn't seen anything from Ansel Elgort since then.
Ever heard of Patrick Bateman? None. No. You ever heard of Talika Patrick?
No. The fuck is that?
A doctor that went missing?
A doctor?
Yeah. She was 30 years old. She worked at this medical center. She was always a normal girl.
Wait, I think I know what this is.
Normal woman. Well, maybe. I don't know if you might know.
Was it a case where she would post videos
on YouTube? I just got the chills, bro.
It would seem like
she was talking to
a lover or
some shit. Yes. But it was weird because the day she went missing, right? She went to a hotel. People were saying how she looked like she was running away from somebody.
She made it seem like she was being followed and shit.
Yes. She ended up disappearing. They found her Twitter. It basically made her look like she was psychotic.
Going crazy, yeah.
Yes. Like she was basically talking to herself.
She also was tweeting to some famous person.
I think he was like a gospel singer.
The thing that people assume is that she went crazy and she thought she had a relationship
with that person, yeah.
And that's what the videos were for, and tweets and shit.
You seen the videos before?
Yeah, it's her getting ready and she's like, "Hey, honey."
There was one where she cooked.
After a dramatic incident, a man showed up at work with a severed human arm. On the 15th of June 2024, just after midnight, a man rang police. That man was 31-year-old Juan Morgan Munoz. He allegedly told the dispatcher that 30 minutes prior he'd accidentally hit a pedestrian with his vehicle. Now, after driving his car into the victim, the man allegedly continued in the car for around a mile and showed up at his workplace. This was the Mako Auto Body Shop in Dallas, Texas. When police arrived at the scene, they were absolutely horrified by what they found. Juan's white BMW was found with a hole in the front passenger side window. There was also an entire human arm on the passenger seat of the vehicle. The seat was reportedly covered in blood. Officers reported that the suspect had glassy/watery eyes, slurred speech, and a strong odor of alcohol. After taking a breathalyzer test, the suspect was found to be reportedly more than double the legal limits. He insisted that he'd only had one shot of alcohol that afternoon. He later allegedly admitted to having taken the substance C. He was arrested and charged with felony DWI and collision involving death.
This man snuck into a toilet so he could spy on girls. This took place in the small village of Miyakochi in Japan. And what happened at a school there that year would shock generations. It was February 28th and schoolteacher Yumi Tanaka was about to make the most disturbing discovery of her life. At about 5 p.m. that day, right before she was about to leave and go home, she decided to go and use the bathroom. And when she entered the cubicle, she noticed something she never saw before. Inside the toilet bowl was a black shoe. Now, the way the toilets worked back then was that the individual toilet was connected to a small sewer tank. So she was confused on where the shoe came from. So she decided to investigate further and peep her head inside the sewer tank. And what she discovered scarred her forever. Inside the tank were a pair of human feet. Upon discovering this, she let out a blood-curdling scream and her co-workers came to her aid. Police came and discovered that the feet were connected to a full body in the tank. They tried to remove the deceased human from the pipe, but it was extremely difficult. Firefighters and a crane had to come to assist moving the body, and eventually it was pulled out. The person inside was a dead male, and at this point was covered in feces, and his cause of death was from hypothermia. The man was later identified as 26-year-old Naoki Kano. It was determined that he was dead for 3 days, and it seems that he voluntarily got into the toilet pipes. They came to the conclusion that he likely squeezed himself inside in an attempt to spy on women using the toilet. This is just disgusting and weird in so many ways, and why in the world would this man do this? There's really no pros to it, and there's just cons. I really want to know his thought process behind this.
We need to talk about child sex tourism. So if you don't understand what this is the practice of elderly men and women from America or other countries traveling to more undeveloped countries where the ages of consent are much lower and then purchasing children to do things with. These are just some of the men who have been caught on camera doing these things. And this opens up a disturbing thought. I mean, you think you know somebody, but what are they doing in these foreign countries? Because laws were passed in the 2000s that outlawed this practice, meaning that if you committed an act with a child in a foreign country, the United States government can still prosecute you. But there was a great documentary made by Chris Hansen where they followed a wealthy American doctor over, I think it was in the Philippines, one of those countries, and caught him in the act of purchasing a child. And then they followed him back to the United States where he had a full family, he ran a successful practice, and he was then turned over to the authorities. But all you have to do is look at this and the low ages of consent in so many different countries. And just recently, a North Dakota lawmaker was caught doing this in the Czech Republic. So how many children have to be hurt before more action is taken against this whole thing? Every single year, the statistics show that over 1 million children are abused as a part of this system. 1 million children. Imagine a group of 1 million children, all of their lives completely changed forever, every single year, every year. And these sick bastards get away with it time and time again. Now, I don't know what I can necessarily do to stop this from happening, but I can inform people and try to get these videos out because this is incredibly disturbing stuff. And I'm going to talk more about this guy in my next TikTok.
Basically, the guy, his name was Daylin Mokpua. So I might have
Continue.
butchered the name, but he's a year older than us, bro. He was 23 years old. So he was young. He was in Hawaii. He was chilling with his grandma, right? You know, in Hawaii, you want to explore, right? Fucking hike. I mean, I would do that shit too. So he was hiking and stuff in the trail called the Stairway to Heaven. And in the trail, he ended up not coming back. He ended up going missing. And the thing is, they could never find his body.
Still to this day?
Still to this day, they can't find his body. But what they did find is, I guess he took pictures on his phone or a little camera, and you can see a guy in the background. And they think that he was being followed by somebody.
You have the pictures?
Yeah, you see pictures of the guy and stuff. and that's like,
That's the guy? Zoom in, zoom in, zoom in, zoom in, zoom in.
see like his head and his legs.
Oh, and that was far away?
Look how far away,
Oh,
bro.
fuck.
In the background. So he probably took a picture like this.
He doesn't look human, low-key.
The only thing that they have is that picture, bro. They don't know what the fuck happened to him.
Bro.
That shit creeps me out, bro. I fucking hate when that shit happens. It's like that same thing that I showed you. Like we talked about it in a previous episode.
Which one?
I remember the kid that went into the abandoned part of the college, and like the last thing that was there.
Not watch this video if you're home alone. This is the horrifying and still unsolved case of Mr. Cruel. In 1991, 13-year-old Carmine Chan was babysitting her younger siblings in Melbourne, Australia. At around 9 p.m, she went into her kitchen to find a man masked with a large knife. The mask was incredibly distinctive, with white stitching around the eyes and the mouth. He locked her younger sisters in the cupboard before dragging Carmine out onto the street and vanishing. A year later, unfortunately, her remains were discovered. She'd been unalived and left in bushland. Unfortunately, she was not the only victim of this masked killer. He was nicknamed Mr. Cruel by newspapers and was a S offender. He's believed to have kidnapped and S-a'd around 12 children. One of his other victims, 10-year-old Sharon Wills, was actually at home with her parents when he broke in. He tied the parents up and disabled their phones. He taped Sharon's mouth and kidnapped her. Although assaulted and obviously traumatized, thankfully he released her. He also kidnapped Nicola Linus and after a 50-hour ordeal released her as well. And the most shocking thing about Mr. Cruel is that his identity is still unknown. As far as we know, he's still alive and walking around to this day. At the time of offending, he is believed to have been roughly around 35 to 40 years old with sandy coloured hair. He is believed to have been located roughly around the area of Melbourne's Tullamarine Airport. If still alive today, police believe he'll be roughly in his 60s and still living in Melbourne, Australia.
The death of Robin Williams was absolutely unexpected and shocking, so let's talk about it. Robin Williams was one of the greatest comedic actors of all time. I myself can say that a number of my favorite childhood movies starred Robin. And at the time of his death, Robin Williams was an A-list actor at the top of his game. I mean, everybody knew who he was. But even though he was considered a national treasure, Robin's life wasn't always perfect. In the late 1970s and 80s, Robin Williams battled a number of addictions. And throughout his entire life, he faced a number of mental health problems. Mental health issues that would eventually consume him. These were the last photos ever taken of Robin Williams before his death in August of 2014. In the photos, you can see him in the background hanging out amongst a crowd at some sort of a function. And the photographer at the time had no idea that these were the last pictures that would ever be taken of Robin Williams. On August 11th, 2014, Robin Williams was found dead at his home in California. The night before Robin Williams died, he placed a number of wristwatches in a sock and dropped them off to someone. Apparently, he told this person that he wanted them to keep them safe for him. Later that evening at around 7 p.m., he called his wife Susan and stated that he was picking up some magazines for her at a bookstore. Once he returned home, he gave the magazines to his wife Susan and he seemed okay according to her. He rummaged around the bedroom, took his iPad out, and Susan was actually happy. He then left the bedroom at around 10:30 p.m. and that was the last time she would ever see him alive. Around 12 hours later, Susan believed that Robin was still sleeping and she left the house. At around noon that day, Robin Williams' assistant became nervous because he wasn't responding. His assistant slipped a note under the door for Robin and then he picked the lock. And when he opened the door, what he saw was extremely disturbing. Robin Williams had hanged himself with a nylon belt from a closet door frame. There were also cuts on his wrists, but it ultimately ended up being the asphyxiation that took Robin's life. Yes, it was eventually revealed that Robin Williams took his own life, and people really couldn't believe it. Robin was an actor known worldwide for his happiness, for his laugh, for his joy that he spread. They had no idea that it was possible that he was struggling so severely inside. It was also eventually revealed that Robin suffered from Parkinson's disease and dementia at the time of his death. And no one knows to this day what really sent Robin over the edge that evening. The one thing that we do know is that the world still misses Robin Williams.
Imagine the police telling you that they know where your loved one's body is at after they've been brutally murdered, but that they are refusing to search for it. This is alleged serial killer Jeremy Anthony Michael Skibicki, and he's just been charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder in the deaths of 4 Indigenous women in Winnipeg, Manitoba. These are 2 of his victims, Morgan Beatrice Harris and Mercedes Myran. And police believe they are likely in the Prairie Green landfill, but they're refusing to search the site due to hazards and ground conditions. Police believe that after the women were killed by Jeremy, their remains were brought to the landfill in the same truckload. The police stated that they haven't been able to narrow down their search over the 4-acre landfill. And since the time that they were put there, the site has since been covered with almost 9,000 tons of wet construction mud that's about 40 feet deep, which was then tightly compressed by machinery. Since then, there's also been about 1,500 tons of animal remains and about 250 tons of asbestos dumped throughout the site. Because of this, police stated, quote, "This would make it difficult to identify human remains and pose a health risk to workers," end quote. The department's assessment has since stated, quote, "There's no hope for a successful recovery," end quote. The remains of Jeremy's third victim, Rebecca Contoy, were found in May by police at the Brady landfill. Police are stating that this is because the search conditions were much more favorable then compared to now, and also that there was a GPS tracker on the garbage truck that carried Rebecca's body. But depending on how long the police knew that these other 2 victims were in the other landfill, it's just negligent. Of course, search conditions were better in May. It was summer, and now that so much time has passed, it's winter. Jeremy's 4th Indigenous victim has been confirmed but not yet identified. Elders in the community are asking that we refer to her as Buffalo Woman for now. As of right now, police do not know where she's located, but know that she was killed around March 15th. Morgan and Mercedes were members of the Long Plain First Nation, and Rebecca was a member of the Crane River First Nation. Families of these women are demanding that the police search for them, and it's kind of disgusting that they even have to advocate for that. I mean, just imagine the police telling you that, "Oh, sorry, I know where your loved one's at, we're just not gonna search for them." I'm gonna leave you with a clip of the family speaking. Listen to their words.
To come here and be so mad and beg so that you will find and bring our loved ones home. The police won't do anything, and they say that they can't search because it's not feasible. Is human life not feasible?
This 87-year-old man was brutally murdered in broad daylight, and this case would not sit right with you. The case that I'm about to explain took place in London, and it's extremely disturbing. This was Thomas O'Halloran, an 87-year-old man that lived in an area called Greenford in London. He was described by people as very nice and loved by literally everybody. Thomas was also always outside his supermarket playing his accordion, raising money for charities. And on August 16th, 2022, Thomas was raising money for a charity outside his local supermarket, and when he was done, he made his way home. Thomas used a mobility scooter to get around due to his age and probably some other issues. So he made his way home on his scooter. Thomas lived with his daughter, so he called her and said he would be home soon. But it's theorized that somebody had noticed Thomas raising money and noticed he had a decent amount of money on him. And sadly, as Thomas was making his way home and was on his final stretch of road before he reached his home, it is assumed that this person tried to rob him, but it went horribly wrong. The person stabbed Thomas in the chest and neck and then fled the scene. After being attacked, Thomas rode his scooter down the road and tried to get some help. He was captured on CCTV talking to 2 young people. He pleaded for them to call emergency services, and Thomas managed to travel 75 yards on his mobility scooter shouting for help. Emergency services arrived at the scene and did everything they could, but sadly, Thomas passed away on the side of the road. Thomas's daughter continued to call him as she was very worried on where he could possibly be. She then got a knock on the door from the police telling her the tragic news about her father, Thomas. The police then started searching for who was responsible for this awful attack. Soon after, this CCTV still was released to the public in hopes somebody knew him or saw him. The police said if you see this man, don't approach him and just call the authorities. And as you can see in the image, he is holding a large knife and his gloves appear to be covered in blood. 2 days later, on August 18th, the suspect was caught and his name was Lee Byer. Lee was a 44-year-old man from London and he was charged with the murder of Thomas. What makes this case stand out is not only that Thomas was an 87-year-old elderly man, but someone who needed assistance in the form of a mobility scooter. Thomas was incapable of fighting back and was completely vulnerable. Lee Byer could have easily just taken the money and if not, could have easily just ran away. But instead, he brutally murdered him in broad daylight. This case shows the best of society, a retired man spending his free time raising money for various groups and people who need it, and the worst of society, a man who was willing to rob an elderly man and stick a knife into his neck for a small amount of money. Lee Byer is currently being held at Broadmoor High Security Psychiatric Hospital and is due to be sentenced on May 10th. This case is absolutely awful and this world is just full of sick people. May Thomas rest in peace.
Police received a very unsettling phone call and then the caller hung up. What they found at the house was horrifying. On the morning of the 19th of June 2024, police received an unnerving phone call. The female caller told police that there was an emergency. She then stated sorry before hanging up the phone. She had given them an address in Voluntown in Connecticut, so dispatchers immediately dispatched some staff over to the area to see what on earth was going on. Horrifically, they found a man deceased in the driveway of the property. He was on the floor with visible injuries on his body. Police were actually unable to gain access to inside of the house. Now, they knew that there had been a woman's voice on the call earlier, so they needed to get inside. They ended up sending drones through one of the windows. That's when they made another alarming discovery. A woman was also lying on the floor unresponsive. When they were finally able to access inside of the home, she was pronounced dead. Now, after speaking with neighbours, the police were able to determine the fact that the pair appeared to have been living together. The actual relationship between the two, though, is at this point unknown. Officers have no idea what the pair's cause of death was, or if there was somebody else potentially involved. We still also don't know whether the female caller that the police got the call from was the deceased female in the property. Investigators now have the tough task of figuring out what on earth went on.
However, coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
This man lost his virginity to a corpse, and the details to this case are absolutely disturbing. We cover the darkest and most messed up things on this channel, but I have a feeling a lot of you will think this is one of the most disgusting and gut-turning ones yet. This is Kevin Davis, and he was from Texas. On March 27, 2014, in the morning, Kevin began to speak to his mother about some feelings he was feeling. He told her that he had a strong dislike towards people, but for the most part, he was unhappy with how his life was going so far, and told his mother that he wanted to take his own life, which took his mother back for a second. She then told Kevin she was very sad about this confession, and Kevin asked her for permission to end his life. Kimberly, who was his mother, told him she didn't want this for him and offered him some help, but also said if he wished to do this to himself, she can't stop him. And after hearing this, Kevin had a change of heart. Her response actually enraged him. He didn't want to end his own life now, he wanted to end his mother's, a fantasy that he actually had for a while. Later on, when Kimberly was relaxing on the couch in the living room, Kevin snuck up behind his mother and began to strangle her with a cord. Kimberly screamed for her life, and fearing that somebody would hear the commotion, Kevin then made a decision to use a more brutal method. He went and grabbed a hammer and repeatedly struck his mother in the head. Kevin hit his own mother in the head 20 times. He wanted to make sure his mother was 100% dead, so he went to the kitchen and grabbed a knife and stuck it into the cavities in the head that he created with the hammer, and then used the knife to mix around his own mother's brain. And curious to see what the brain felt like, he stuck his fingers and hands into the holes and began to feel around. And if that wasn't bad enough, Kevin did something after this that is so awful it doesn't even sound real. He carried his mother's body from the living room to the master bedroom, leaving behind a trail of blood. And once inside the bedroom, he removed his mother's clothes and had his way with her corpse. Yes, with her corpse. And after he was done, he wrote a couple of notes for the police, with one saying, "Chase me, sorry for the mess, KD." He then got on his bike and attempted to get out of town, but decided he didn't want to go on the run, and instead was actually going to turn himself in. Kevin then knocked on the door of a random house, and a couple then answered the door. Kevin then asked the people who lived there if he can use their phone to call the police, because he just murdered his own mother. Kevin then called and told the dispatcher his mother was dead in their house, and that he was the one who did it. Police arrived at the house that Kevin went to, and he was arrested. Police then went to Kevin's house and followed the trail of blood inside, and then found Kimberly's dead body in the bedroom. Kevin was questioned and confessed to everything he'd done with no emotion at all. The police asked why he killed his mother in such a brutal way, and Kevin responded with, "Absolutely nothing. I'm just a terrible, disgusting person. She was the best mother in the world." But Kevin also stated he wouldn't take back anything he'd done. He even described what his mother's brains felt like, describing it as a putty substance. He then told them about taking her to the bed and performing that awful, disgusting act. saying he often had fantasies about doing that to a lifeless body. He even said he waited a while for his sister to come home so he can do the same thing to her, but decided not to because he had his fill for that day. I can't imagine being the sister and hearing what your brother did to your mother and then later finding out he planned on doing the same thing to you. Kevin made it a point to let the police know he was aware of everything he was doing, and he said, "I'm not mentally disturbed, I'm sane." He then said he deserved 100 years in prison, and with a smile on his face, he said he never had sex up until that day. He then laughed and said, "I guess I lost my virginity to a corpse." And what's even more messed up is he said if he was ever released from prison that he would do it all over again. It took the jury 1 hour to get a verdict, and Kevin was given the maximum possible sentence, which was life in prison. But what is absolutely insane is that he is eligible for parole in 2044, which makes no sense, because he said if he was ever released, he would do the same exact thing. I've covered so many cases and some that are truly unforgettable, but I think this one is going to stick with me forever. The sheer brutality and messed up things Kevin did to his own mother is truly unbelievable. I know this is truly messed up, and I could imagine some of you can't handle this. So if you made it this far into the video, please let me know your thoughts on this entire case. These are creepy things you never knew existed. Okay, so every single one of us would love to go and visit Japan. But if you do, whatever you do, never stay at these hotels in Japan. There are these hotels in Japan that cost only $1 a night to stay in. But there's a disturbing twist. These hotels live stream every single one of your movements to complete random people and strangers. So every single second you're spending in these rooms, you will be live streamed to thousands of people, just watching your every movement for no reason at all. They can watch you eat, sleep, bite your nails, or just anything else that you do. But the scariest part about this whole thing is that your identity, your face, and your location is now known by thousands of random strangers. So unless you're a person that likes going to random countries and having your location and identity known by every single person, this might be the place for you to stay. But let's be honest, I don't think anybody wants that. But I know there's some people with a budget that would just get over all of that and pay the dollar. But in my opinion, this is just weird and just kind of disturbing. These are videos humans were never meant to see. Okay, so we all know if a nuclear war ever happened, the two big dogs in it would be Russia versus the United States. And the video I'm about to show you is a super realistic simulation of an all-out nuclear war between Russia and the United States. This is absolutely terrifying, and just imagine all of these nukes going off at once, because this is what would happen.
This British father of four did the unthinkable on Facebook Live. So this is Paul David Hilton. He was 34 years old, and on April 30th of 2022, he started a live stream on his personal Facebook account. Now, to everybody that knew Paul, he seemed like one of the happiest people around. And when Paul started his live stream that evening, multiple friends and family members joined in. According to one friend named Lewis, he thought that Paul would be telling jokes or doing something amusing. He even said he thought the live stream would be funny. But the events that unfolded in Paul's home pictured above that evening would be far from funny. And in fact, when people joined in, they noticed that Paul had extremely slurred speech and he didn't seem like himself. It was when people really realized what Paul was about to do, though, when they started calling the police and authorities, but it was too late. On that live stream, Paul took his own life by hanging and broadcast it in front of all of his friends and family that were watching. Now, after investigation was done, Paul's blood alcohol level was found to be 2.5 times the normal limit, and they also found cocaine in his system. Those extremely close to Paul knew that he had struggled with mental health issues in the past, and that even recently, the year before, he had been referred to an addiction counseling center. But it seems like his struggles with drug abuse and mental health really got the best of Paul when he decided to live stream his own unaliving on that evening.
Hotel in Tonopah has now been ranked among the most haunted hotels in the country.
3 minors set out to rob the bank one day, and 1 minor shot the other 2, leaving their bodies in the vault.
In one of the corner rooms on the 5th floor is where he started to strangle her.
According to Tracy, if you pull back the carpeting in that very spot, you can still see her bloodstains in the wood flooring.
The Mitzpah Hotel is believed by many to be home of several ghostly figures.
In this episode, we're investigating 2 of the most haunted places in Nevada, the Clown Motel and the Mizpah.
Oh! Hotel! Oh, oh!
2 people murdered in here.
Yeah, and they are said to be down here. Our number 1 lady of the night, Miss Rose, over here.
Evelyn.
No! The lady in red's name is Evelyn!
Lots of people have died here.
Do you want me to turn my light on red? Right when I hit red, dude. Oh, what the was that?
Are you the spirit of the killer?
You scared? Who is the evil man?
Man evil.
Why do you like to scratch people, though? Are you afraid of people getting too close to the truth?
Seven pit bulls ripped this man's face off, killing him, and it's absolutely brutal. This 46-year-old man named Aglacer Pereira was going for his morning walk one day when he was suddenly attacked and brutally killed by dogs. He was ambushed by 7 pit bulls and had his face completely ripped off. They escaped from a farm and attacked the first thing they saw, which was Aglacer. A brave passerby rescued him from the gruesome attack and called an ambulance. They then helped the victim down the road to meet the emergency vehicle. Aglacer was rushed to the Santa Cruz Hospital in central Pinho, over 20 miles away from the area where the incident took place. The pit bulls had completely bitten off all the skin on his face, leaving his skull completely exposed. The only way I could really describe how his face looked is if you poured red paint all over a white skull and let it dry. He had no eyes, no lips, no nose, no facial features at all. It was just skull and blood and some skin left over and some tissue. I really don't recommend looking up the photo because it will make you lose sleep. It's absolutely disturbing. But after Aglacer arrived at the hospital, he tragically succumbed to his injuries. Can you just imagine enjoying your daily walk and you see 7 pit bulls running towards you? I know I would be absolutely terrified. I feel so bad for Aglacer, and may he rest in peace. This is absolutely brutal. This might be the most brutal way somebody has ever died, and whatever you do, don't look up the picture. Octavio da Silva was a 20-year-old soccer referee in Brazil, and on June 30th, 2013, he was refereeing a soccer game when he sent off a player named Josmir Santos Abreu, who was 31 years old. He refused to leave the field and began a fight with the referee. Abreu threw a punch which made Octavio draw a knife from his pocket and repeatedly stab Abreu. Abreu died on the way to the hospital, and when fans watching the game, including Abreu's family and friends, found out about his death, they invaded the field and stoned Octavio before decapitating him, and then ripping his limbs from his body with just their strength and no weapons, and then put his head on a stick in the middle of the field. And what makes this worse is that a graphic video surfaced online shortly after the incident, showing medical personnel reassembling Octavio's body. The video and pictures are extremely disturbing, and I don't recommend looking them up. The way his limbs looked after being ripped off is extremely unsettling to look at, because you see strings of flesh, tissue, and bone because it wasn't cut off properly and it was just ripped off. This case is absolutely awful, but why did Octavio pull out a knife when somebody just punched him? If he didn't stab Josmir Abreu to death, he would still be alive today. But just imagine being literally ripped limb from limb by an angry group of soccer fans, and there's nothing you can do as they pull your body apart.
These are the heartbreaking final texts of a victim from the Pulse nightclub shooting. Pulse was one of the biggest nightclubs in Orlando, Florida. On the evening of the 11th of June 2016, they were hosting a Latin night. Pulse was a gay nightclub and they regularly had drag queens performing for the crowds. Around 2 a.m. of the morning of the 12th of June, an attack began. Suddenly, a man opened fire on around 300 people that were inside the venue. Initially, there was confusion and some people thought that it was firecrackers or part of the music. At 2:09, the club posted on Facebook, "Everyone get out of Pulse and keep running." The gunman had exchanged fire with a policeman at the door who was working that night. Now, Imran Yusuf, who was a veteran working as a bouncer, recognised the sound of gunfire. He jumped over a locked door where behind people were hiding in fear. He opened a latched door behind them, allowing around 70 people to escape. His quick thinking undoubtedly saved many lives. Police raced to the scene and a battle began inside, which forced the gunman back. Terrifyingly, he took several hostage in the toilets at the back of the building. He warned police that he had explosives. During this time, terrified partygoers text loved ones to try and get help. 30-year-old accountant Eddie Justice sent these heartbreaking texts to his mum. At 2:45 a.m, the gunman, identified as Omar Mateen, called News 13 of Orlando. He announced that he was the shooter and he stated his reasons for doing so. Hostage negotiators were called in and police decided to storm the building at around 5 a.m. Dozens of people who had been cowering in another bathroom managed to flee before the gunman emerged. Another gunfight ensued between the gunman and police until they finally shot him dead. 49 people died and 58 were injured. At the time, it was the worst mass shooting in modern US history until 2017, when the Las Vegas shooting occurred. This is the last picture of this woman alive. Minutes later, her husband did the unthinkable. Butterfly Valley in Muğla, Turkey is an incredibly popular beauty spot. In June 2018, Hakan Aysal was visiting the spot with his wife, 32-year-old Semra. The pair were expecting a child soon, as Semra was 7 months pregnant. The cliff was actually 1,000 feet up, and many tourists are enticed there with the lure of the beautiful views. However, little did she know, Semra had been lured there for an entirely different reason. Semra was actually afraid of heights, but Hakan convinced her that the trip to the cliff would pay off. Prior to the pair going on the holiday, Hakan had actually taken out life insurance for his wife. On the day in question, he lured her to the edge of the cliff to take a selfie. They'd actually been up there around 3 hours, and Hakan had been waiting for the exact time to strike when nobody was watching. After taking the photo, he callously shoved his pregnant wife off the edge of the cliff, causing her to plummet to her death. A witness driving past was then flagged down by Hakan, who he described as completely calm. The man later stated, "I was driving there and I saw someone was waving at me and I stopped." Hakan came and said that his wife had fallen down the cliff. He said, "We immediately got out of the car and started looking for her, but we couldn't see where she would have landed from where we were." He then said, "We tried to get closer to the edge for a better look. Hakan did not come with us down there. He was not acting like a man whose wife had just fallen off a cliff." Photos of the couple were shared on the news, and a tourist came forward to say that they had actually seen the pair too. They had noted that it was odd that the pair were scrambling down a very rocky area to get to the very edge. The pair were even captured on video by a tourist who had joked, "Either this man will throw the woman off or the woman will throw the man." Suspicions were raised further when Hakan tried to claim an insurance payout shortly after his wife's death. Hakan tried to claim insanity, but he was ordered to serve at least 30 years behind bars before he can appeal for release. This is the moment right before this woman was fatally shot live on TV. Allison Parker was a budding young journalist from Martinsville, Virginia. She graduated from James Madison University, and in 2014 she started working on air. This was for the morning show of WDBJ7. It was early in the morning of the 26th of August 2015 when Allison and her cameraman, 27-year-old Adam Ward, were preparing for a broadcast. Allison had actually just celebrated her 24th birthday and she was getting back into the swing of work. The pair were due to cover the 50th anniversary of the Smith Mountain Lake. In the middle of a live interview, though, something horrific would take place. It was around 6:45 a.m. and during the live broadcast, a man in black approached. Terrifyingly, he was carrying a gun. Suddenly, he fired at Allison and he then turned the weapon onto Adam. He fired shots at the woman that was being interviewed, called Vicky Gardner. She actually thought quickly and played dead on the floor. Terrifyingly, the camera was still rolling and broadcasting to the horrified viewers at home as Allison and Adam lay dead. The gunman then fled the scene. The cameras were cut by the control room and the live feed cut back to the stunned journalists in the studio. They understandably could not process what had just happened. Police raced to the scene and Vicky was rushed to hospital and thankfully survived her gunshot wound. The other journalists at the news station thankfully actually recognised who the gunman was. They told police the shooter was Vester Flanagan. He'd actually previously worked for the news station until he was sacked for making staff feel uncomfortable. He had a history of being sacked from jobs due to bizarre behaviour and threatening people. It transpired that Vesta had planned out his shooting in detail. He tweeted a confession shortly after and posted a video of the shooting to his Facebook. Police were obviously desperate to track him down, but before they could do so, he crashed his car and unalived himself.
What are some Google searches that have led to people's arrests? Today we're going to talk about the dentist who was just arrested for putting poison in his wife's protein shakes. I cover all sorts of spooky and true crime stuff on this page, so follow along for more. On March 6, Angela Craig went to the hospital for dizziness and severe headaches. She would eventually pass away as her symptoms got worse. But what we know now is that her husband, James Craig, was slipping both arsenic and cyanide into her protein shakes. And part of the reason we know this is because of what James was looking up on his work computer weeks before his wife's death. Searches like how to make poison, undetectable poisons, and 5 undetectable poisons that show no sign of foul play, as if there was a fun listicle about it. And the shocking part of all of this is allegedly not the first time that James had tried to poison his wife. He allegedly poisoned her 5 or 6 years ago, and she found out. And it's now believed that he was doing all this so that he could run away with another woman.
This model was murdered in Croydon, and what her killer said in court will make your blood boil. Sally Ann Bowman was born in 1987 in Carshalton in South London. She had 3 sisters and was very talented and attended the Brit School for Performing Arts and Technology in Croydon. As you can see, she was very beautiful and she had dreams of becoming a professional model. After leaving school, she worked as a part-time hairdresser and tried to make it as a model. In 2005, she joined Pulse Model Agency. She actually became the face of Swatch watches. Her career was going from strength to strength, and it looked like all her dreams were about to come true. That was until the 24th of September 2005. Sally was 18 at this point and was starting to go on nights out. On the night in question, she was out with her sister and a group of friends. They went to Lloyd's Bar in Croydon and stayed there until around 1 a.m. Now, CCTV captured her leaving the bar and she waited around 15 minutes outside for a taxi. She then contacted her ex-boyfriend, Lewis Sproston, who offered to pick her up. The pair initially broke up due to accusations of them both cheating. However, that night, Lewis picked her up from Croydon Town Centre around 2:20 a.m. He drove her to her house in Beinheim Crescent. Unfortunately, in the car, they got into another argument about the cheating rumours, and Lewis actually sped off at around 4 a.m. as Sally got out of the car. Shortly after this, neighbours reportedly heard screaming but didn't actually go outside to see what was going on. Sally Ann lay outside having been stabbed in the neck and stomach. She was AR'd as she lay dead or dying. Her belongings were stolen, including her cardie, her bag and her phone. She was found deceased next to her home, and police initially thought that Lewis was to blame. He was arrested and held for 4 days until finally DNA evidence eliminated him as a suspect. It wasn't until 9 months later this man was arrested. This was 35-year-old Croydon man Mark Dixie. Police had luckily managed to swab Mark 2 weeks earlier for having been involved in a brawl in a pub where he worked as a chef. The DNA they collected matched the DNA on Sally Ann. In court, Mark would admit to R-ing her after finding her on the ground outside her house. He denied murdering her though. Infuriatingly, he said he did not realise she was dead or dying when he found her. He was found guilty and sentenced to a minimum of 34 years. Frustratingly, it was actually then revealed that Mark was already a convicted serial S offender. He'd obviously been free to kill Sally Ann. He's unlikely to be considered for parole until at least 2040 when he's around 70.
What? Look in there, mate. Look in there. What? Look in there.
Murdered along with her 2-year-old daughter and buried under the kitchen floor. 25-year-old Benny Lynn Burke and her daughter Jellica moved from the Philippines in 2019 to the UK in search of a better life. 2 years later, they were dead. In February 2021, during lockdown in the UK, 52-year-old Andrew Innes is said to have targeted Benny Lynn through a dating website. He'd driven down to Bristol, picked up Benny Lynn and her daughter, and driven them back to his home in Dundee. They were reported missing 2 weeks later as family couldn't get in touch with them, and police saw Andrew's car on CCTV driving down to Bristol and back to Dundee the same day, and they tracked his car back to his home. At first, Andrew said that he'd driven down to Bristol, picked them up, and then driven them to Glasgow where he'd dropped them off with another man, but after further questioning, he admitted the murders and told police, "They're under my kitchen floor." Benny Lane was found 4 feet under Andrew's kitchen floor, wrapped in plastic and a blanket, and her daughter's naked body was found next to her. Benny Lane had been hit repeatedly over the head with a hammer and stabbed with a samurai sword, and 2-year-old Jellica had been raped, smothered and strangled to death. It later came to light that Jellica had been murdered 3 days after her mother. Shockingly, there was also a 7-year-old girl found in Andrew's house. She was sat in the living room watching cartoons on TV. She hasn't been named for legal reasons. She was able to tell police that Andrew had killed Benny Lane with a hammer, and she also said that she'd been playing hide and seek with Jellica when Andrew closed the bathroom door and killed Jellica. She'd been in that house with Andrew for 2 weeks and was subjected to horrific sexual assaults and rape. Police said that if they'd arrived just 24 hours later, she could have been Andrew's 3rd murder victim. Her brave testimony was key in Andrew's trial. The trial took place in February 2023 and Andrew denied murder, claiming diminished responsibility. It took the jury just 2.5 hours to reach a guilty verdict for the murder of Benny Lane, the rape and murder of Jellica, and the rape and abuse of the 7-year-old girl. Passing sentence, Lord Beckett said that this was one of the worst crimes that's come before the High Court of Edinburgh. He sentenced Andrew to life with a minimum of 36 years, meaning he'll likely die in prison as he won't be eligible for parole until the age of 88. Andrew is currently planning to appeal his sentence.
Can you tell a place has a dark history just from looking at it? In this series, I'm showing you some photos so you can see. And I cover all sorts of spooky and true crime stuff on this page, so follow along. This is the Wisconsin home of Ed Gein, also known as the Butcher of Plainfield. There's actually very few photos of this house that are in any way appropriate to share because of the nature of his crimes. It was in this house that Ed taught himself taxidermy after his mother passed away, and it was the local cemetery where he would go to rob graves and practice what he had learned. This is the room that Ed's mother lived in, and after she passed away, he had it completely sealed off and never touched it. This is in part why the movie Psycho was based on Ed Gein. Ed's mother would tell him all these crazy things, like that women were all guilty of lust and they were just sent to tempt men, which is why many people think that he specifically hated women. And you might be thinking that these photos were taken years after he was out of the house, maybe it had been abandoned for a while, but no, these are the conditions that Ed would live in. When robbing graves wasn't enough for Ed, he moved on to taking people's lives. And to this day, no one's definitively sure how many lives he took. But there's a real darkness to these photos, and if you're brave enough to look up the other ones online, you can see how disturbed the person living there actually was.
Bludgeoned with a hammer and strangled to death while she was making a cup of tea. Holly Carroll was murdered by her husband, who then calmly sat and drank a cup of tea and made lunch for their 3 children while she lay dead on the kitchen floor. Chris and Holly were separated after a volatile marriage, but Chris still visited regularly to see their 3 children. Holly was described by her mum and sisters as a bubbly mum of 3 who was loved by everybody who met her. She lit up every room she walked into, and she was devoted to her 3 children and a vital part of the small community that she lived in Wales. But to her controlling and manipulative husband, she was nothing more than someone he could coerce and bully. On Sunday, April 22nd, 2018, Holly messaged her sister, saying, "He's here now, so I might not be able to message, as yesterday he twisted my arms backwards and nearly ran me over to get my phone." Seconds later, she messaged again to say, "He's just got into the shed and got a hammer." Her sister urged her to call the police, but it was too late. Chris launched a violent and frenzied attack on Holly. He hit her to the side of the head with the hammer, and as she fell to the ground, he then got on top of her and strangled her until she stopped moving. He then calmly sat and drank the cup of tea that she'd just made for herself, cleaned up the blood, and then wrapped Holly in plastic and their son's Thomas the Tank Engine bedsheets. He then placed Holly in the boot of the car and then made lunch for their 3 children. After they'd finished lunch, he put them in the car too and drove to his mother's farm, where he used a tractor to bury Holly's body. He then stopped at a petrol station where he saw a police community support officer, and he asked if he could report his wife missing as she'd left him that same day. He then started covering his tracks and started contacting Holly's friends and family to say that she'd left him and taken her clothes with her. He even went as far as setting up a Facebook page for Missing Holly. At first, police absolutely bought his story. He seemed like a concerned husband, not someone who'd just committed a murder. He even joined in with the search party. However, a witness came forward the next day to say that they'd seen Chris in an area of remote farmland climbing over a fence, and when asked what he was doing, he said that he was burying his dead dog. Police searched the area and found Holly's body buried in a shallow grave. She died from blunt force trauma to the head and pressure to the neck. The tip of one of her fingers had also been amputated. Chris was arrested on April 27th and admitted the murder. During his trial, Holly's mother said to him, "You took my soulmate and carved out my heart. You've changed the axis on which my world turned, and I'll never accept what you did." Chris pleaded guilty, and on November 2nd, 2018, he was given life with a minimum of 25 years.
This is the disturbing case of the child who killed a child. In July 2018, 6-year-old Alicia McPhail was abducted from her bed. She'd been staying with her grandparents in the Isle of Bute. She'd gone to sleep watching Peppa Pig, and no one had any idea of the horrors that would unfold that evening. Meanwhile, 16-year-old Aaron Campbell was drinking with friends at his house. Aaron apparently became upset in the night because he had been arguing with his mum. He had had a challenging upbringing involving physical and emotional abuse. Aaron decided that evening he wanted to get some substances to smoke from a couple that he knew. The couple in question were Alicia's dad, Robert, and his girlfriend. They'd been known to sell substances to Aaron previously, but he could not get hold of them. Intending to go and steal them off them, Aaron armed himself with a knife. He headed to Robert's house where he lived with his parents and girlfriend. This was obviously where Alicia was staying that evening. When he arrived at the house, he noticed the 6-year-old sleeping in her bed and took the opportunity to snatch the poor defenseless young child. Disgustingly, he carried her to a secluded location, SA'd her, and then killed her. He then disposed of his clothes in the sea. At 6 a.m. the next day, Alicia's grandparents woke up to discover that the little girl was missing. They straight away alerted police and locals. When the family asked Aaron to keep an eye out for the little girl, he texted them back saying, "Oh damn, I'm sure she's not went too far." A local man soon discovered Alicia's lifeless body around 15 minutes away from her house. Along with a lot of the local community, Aaron's mum actually checked her CCTV of her house. She was hoping that this would help with the investigation, and it definitely did. She saw her son leaving and returning from the house that night, and she handed the evidence over to police. Aaron was arrested, and it was discovered that the clothes that he'd abandoned on the beach did actually match with his DNA. This case made me terrified to go to the cinema. This is the case of the horror in Screen 9. James Holmes was raised in California. His mum was a nurse and his dad was a scientist. From a young age, he was experiencing night terrors and allegedly actually tried to take his own life when he was just 11 years old. He was apparently obsessed with guns and weapons and had dreamed of becoming a mass murderer. Between May and July 2012, he legally bought 4 guns. Background checks were conducted and he was allowed the weapons. He also bought spike strips, which, if you don't know, pop the tyres of cars if they chase after you. On July the 19th, just hours before tragedy would unfold, James mailed his notebook to his psychiatrist. Inside the notebook, James detailed his plans to kill. The notebook was actually discovered later on undelivered. Just prior to entering a cinema in Aurora, James rang a crisis line to tell them about his plans to kill. However, the call was disconnected after just 9 seconds. At the midnight showing of The Dark Knight Rises, CCTV captures James walking into the cinema. He walks into Screen 9, props open the door, and then walks back out again. Shockingly, he goes to his car and gets guns out and gas canisters. He re-entered the screen at about 12:38 p.m. and set off 2 gas canisters. When he entered screen 9 again, he immediately opens fire on the audience, instantly killing 10 people. 2 others later died in hospital from their injuries. An additional 70 people were injured. This was an absolutely packed out cinema. James also shot at people as they scrambled to exit the screen. His youngest victim was a 6-year-old girl. Witnesses said this all unfolded as there was actually a gunfight on the screen, and initially they all thought it was special effects and just part of the film. Police were actually on the scene very quickly after the first 911 call. James surrendered to the police and was arrested in the car park. He was apparently very calm when he was arrested and told police that he had booby-trapped his apartment. When police investigated his apartment, this was found out to be true. He was sentenced to 12 consecutive life sentences.